In this video today, we're going to take a journey back in time to a game that came out over a decade ago, Total War Medieval 2. We're going to discuss how Medieval changed the landscape of Total War games, then at the end of the video, talk about how the game holds up over all these years. So let's take a step back. It's 2006, and if you're me, you're just settling into your first year of college looking and feeling awkward as hell. Then, a gem hits the shelves, Medieval 2, and it blows your tits clear off. Up to this point in Total War's timeline, the pinnacle of the franchise was Rome and its Barbarian Invasion DLC, but Medieval 2 expands on a lot of mechanics that existed in Rome 1. Also, the game introduces a morality system, merchants, evolving faction banners, prisoners, ransoms, heretics, and most importantly, marriage.
Come to claim the right of Prima Nocta.
Med 2 just had so much going for it and is widely regarded as the best Total War to have ever come out. Creative Assembly just put out a mobile port, which has me thinking we'll get a remaster by year's end, as this follows suit with Rome 1's remaster just last year. But let's get started on our journey through Total War Medieval 2 in 2022, and if it has held up to the test of time. Opening Medieval 2, you jump into a campaign that feels very similar to Rome 1. In fact, the map feels all too familiar, especially if you're like me and start with one of 3 Italian factions. But hidden behind the slightly improved map is a bevy of campaign complexity. Want to sell your daughters off for some foppish nobles for a chance at fresh livestock? You can use the princess for just that. Looking to peddle your wares across the many resource nodes on the map? Old Shylock here will help you out. How's about converting the local populace to your desired religion? Priests aplenty shall be your guide, and you can spy on your enemy, even opening up their gates just like in Rome 1 using these guys. Lastly, you have the capability to pretty much enter into talks about every single facet of the game, from wars to map information and settlement trading with the diplomat. Just these 5 agents really gives you a chance to crack into portions of the campaign on a big scale. It is unfortunate that you can't necessarily plan marriages to have some amazing family tree of incestual super soldier babies. That's the wrong game. But you can grow a family tree in Medieval 2 through marriages that bring more generals/governors to your faction, as well as by adopting other kids randomly throughout the campaign. Then there's the Pope, that goofy hat-wearing bastard and his constant demands upon your campaign. Just like Rome's Senate missions, the Pope will issue you missions from time to time. And this can be annoying since you're finally on your own and you want to go to fast food at 2 in the morning for French toast sticks, then fuck you, Pope, I'm going to do it. But outside of that is the Cardinal and Crusade system. The priests in your land, if their piety is high enough, can actually be voted into the College of Cardinals, where they can then eventually rise to become Pope. This then plays into the Crusade system because you can actually request that the Pope commission a damn crusade to pretty much any excommunicated or heretic territory. This is such an awesome feature that introduces a lot of autonomy into your campaign from the start, something that a lot of latter Total Wars eschew in lieu of a more on-the-rails system. And that's something worth noting as well. Almost everything about Medieval 2 feels entirely left up to you. Papal missions aside, I've always felt that this campaign is the strongest with very few limitations on your playthrough. And even further, the ability to commission a crusade is an awesome way to get the AI's assistance in tackling particularly strong factions for opportunistic players. Speaking of that, the game also expands upon the existing attribute system of previous titles by making them have a lot more weight on your playthrough. Each agent's specific stat line allows them to get more out of their specific use cases. The charm of princesses and influence of diplomats allows them to both make challenging diplomatic agreements or get more money out of certain diplomatic actions. We talked quickly about the priest's piety, but allows them to root out heretics and witches, convert the local populace, and even secure a seat within the papacy. Spy subterfuge increases the chance of them discovering those foot pics you deleted off your phone that are now located on your iCloud. The merchant's finance scale allows for more money from resource nodes, but it also allows for a means of buying out other merchants. If your skill is higher than the AI's merchant, you can effectively remove them from the map. There's just so much detail in these characters, but what I really love is the morality system of the game. Morality systems were a huge part of gaming at the turn of the millennium. Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, Mass Effect, Black and White, Fable, everyone wanted a piece of that pie. Medieval 2 introduced the chivalry and dread system. Your general could either show mercy and do good deeds, granting traits that give chivalry, which would conversely help with population growth and troop morale, or They could commit atrocities, such as assassinations or killing captives, which would result in dread gain, making you feared throughout the land for your medieval torture chamber, reducing the morale of both allies and enemy troops on the battlefield. This customization again nets you a strong sense of agency over your campaign. Rebuild the Kingdom of Sicily as a benevolent ruler and descendant of Robert Guiscard, or maybe the Tyrant of England, uniting lands under an iron grip of poorly cooked fish and chips. The choice is yours. Let's hit on another topic. Have you ever wanted to be a medieval real estate mogul? Well, look no further, because Medieval 2 allows you to be the tyrannical absentee landlord you always wanted to be. Your burgeoning empire that is on the cusp of contracting the Black Plague can be filled with sprawling cities, allowing the same level of granularity when it comes to buildings that Rome 1 had. Churches, road systems, farmlands, even guilds for Knights Hospitalier and Knights Templar in the end of the game are all available to you. But wait, what about all those military buildings? Well, Medieval 2 has a very interesting system, splitting settlements across a choice of either town or castle. Both settlement types have a series of overlapping buildings like basic civic and military structures, but the more advanced versions of those are unlocked by specializing your location. Castles provide better defensive structures as well as access to some of your faction's best soldiers, while your towns and later cities will give you all the juicy means of securing the financial future of your empire. Which brings me to my next point as it relates to these two: trade. Trade is done in a far more visceral manner that becomes abandoned somewhere after Empire Total War. You can eventually see the physical trade routes and trade caravans traversing these routes. Place an army there and it interrupts trade for your opponent, cutting off their money. Position a navy in a trade lane on the ocean and it has the same effect. Everything in this section are things that were very present in Rome 1, but Medieval 2 just made that much better. And it's something that I miss about the latter conventions in the franchise, which have gone with a more streamlined approach, but simultaneously making it far more needlessly complex without transparency. That's another thing. The amount of information that you can crack into in Med 2 is pretty astounding for its time. Take a look at this photograph. If you open up your settlement details panel, you can see every bit of information on population growth, public order, income, and religion. Looking specifically at income, I can see precisely how much income I'm getting and from what sources. I love this level of detail because I can also see how this is reflected if I build a specific building that maybe adds more tradable goods or more farmland. Taking this one step further, I can then get breakdowns of trade across the settlement with the trade summary icon. Now, I know exactly what I'm importing and exporting, as well as if it's by land or if by sea. I had entirely forgotten this was part of Medieval 2, and it's shockingly refreshing to see that my trust in the game actually being great, not just a sentiment colored by the rosy tinted glasses of nostalgia. Alright, we've talked a lot about the campaign map. Let's segue into a discussion about combat, since it's the damn name of the game and everything. I'll just let this play to really dip you back into the warm fuzzy pool of nostalgia.
I have many terrible scars, but all of them were taken honorably in battle. Shortly, I may take another wound, if God wills it, for I do not intend to skulk in the manner of a Frenchman. That is of no account, though, for I mean to have victory wherever the pain to my person. These rebellious knaves and villains are not fit to breathe the same air as we honest men. They must all die before dawn comes again. This is a mercy, because they richly deserve the gallows for turning against their betters. We band of brothers are 1/4 of our soldiers. And thus we carry a heavy duty to our people, our king, and our God. And now I trust my life to God, for I know our cause is true and just. So pray, you beetle-headed knaves, and make sure God knows you think the same.
And what a note to open on, that thick northern Italian accent delivering all the hype a man could ever need before storming a castle controlled by Swiss rebels. Medieval 2 has this way of making these minor battles feel like major campaign pivoting points, where you're about to swing the entire series around. Again, this is something that is very much abandoned in the latter Total War games. You can of course simply skip them, and most will once you play enough battles, but there will always be those times where you have a particularly hard-pressed or important conflict with a speech just adds a bit of immersion and spice to the game that I love. Falling into the actual combat, we get a far more visceral experience in Rome 1, and a more muted experience in the blown out, intense ragdoll, dismemberment, and blood effects of the more recent titles in the series. Medieval's combat is diverse in that it still holds up pretty well. The ability for your troops to engage in a massive melee, Norman knights killing their way through militia, or mailed knights riding down spearmen, whatever the scenario is, you just get a lot of intense gameplay kicking off for you. This is what made Total War games for me in the earlier days. The intense zoomed-in melee and tumult of the battlefield. Archers shooting flaming arrows during a night battle, or flanking charges from your units. Whatever the case, it just still feels good. Sure, the graphics are dated and the telltale sign of polygon hands and stretched textures are present, but the overall sense of epicness is very much there. Moreover, is both the intensity and complexity of this siege system. Even in just the first 20 or 30 turns of the game, you might be pitted with an intense siege against a fortified stone castle with massive towers hurling flaming shots across the battlefield. The need for siege equipment is, of course, something that is magnified in Medieval 2, as the focus on castles was such an important convention of the times. Your siege towers, if you don't make enough, will simply be destroyed at the foot of your enemy's walls. Battering rams will catch fire long before they reach the gates, and your troops will be left without an avenue to victory. Siege ladders aren't conjured from thin air and need to be produced ahead of time for any units not using the aforementioned tools. Also, if you don't pace yourself when drinking a 12-pack of Newcastle, your roommate will find you in the hallway passed out. All this just plays so well together to create a very immersive battle experience across both open field skirmishes and the sieges that will occupy large portions of your campaign. Falling back on my discussion about choosing between creating a city or a castle, it actually makes conquering territory feel a lot more varied. While you can have walled cities and what have you, the variance of castle and city across your enemy's territory breaks up the monotony of, say, Warhammer 3, where everything is a walled siege, from minor settlement to provincial capital. It also allows you as the player to have castles on your front lines, with a few dotting your hinterlands, or maybe you have certain locations that focus primarily on military. Even just the creation and procurement of your settlements for the pending battles you will fight creates a narrative in and of itself. Now, after all this conflict is completed, is one of my favorite parts of Medieval 2, the prisoner system. Any routing units can be run down by your units, instantly gibbing them and adding them to your total prisoners captured during the battle. In the post-battle screen, you can then decide one of three outcomes. Executing the prisoners will destroy relations between you and your enemy, gain you dread, but also drain the opposition's resources. Releasing the prisoners will net you chivalry, but you'll come to face those units again in the future. Then lastly, you can strike a balance where you ransom the units, giving you a hefty sum of money. This extends to the lords, faction heirs, and faction leaders, so any general you capture in battle can be dealt with as you see fit. I love this. It's so simple because it's not, unheard of, and it's not an insanely complex system. It's very straightforward, and it delivers that same agency I talked about earlier to the campaign, where you get to really choose how all this plays out for you. Historically speaking, capturing and ransoming nobles was a huge part of the Middle Ages, and it's something that Total War nailed in Medieval 2. It's time now to crack into the dirty underbelly of the game and see how it has stacked up over the ages. To be fair, some things we're about to talk about are really just a symptom of the time, but it's still worth noting when we're comparing the game and how it has aged. Probably one of the most overt issues with the game is the graphics. This is going to be, most often, the first thing anyone looks at. Looking at Medieval 2, we do get plenty of warped textures, flat faces, polygonal hands, all the things that I mentioned in the battle section. This extends to unit portraits and whatnot, being very pixely and pretty hard to distinguish what the hell is going on. It's like groping around your bed at night looking for your phone and end up finding a shoe and then wondering why a shoe is in your bed. A lot of this can be fixed with post-processing programs. I've been using Reshade for this entire video, so it adds a bit more depth and character to the present graphics by sharpening them, adding contrast, what have you. I'll drop a link in the description if you want to give it a try. I use it for a good deal of games. Ultimately, I will say that the graphics are really not that bad, especially when compared to any of the previous games in the series. Reflective surfaces are still present, and you get a lot of great lighting. The real issue with the graphics isn't really linked to the visual fidelity, it's the settings. At the time, most monitors weren't rocking 2K or 4K widescreen curved formats. Nay, a lot of people still had CRTs or were just starting to break into flat screens. As thus, most of the resolutions, like 2K, which I play at, result in distorted and slightly stretched textures across the menu screens and other bits of information. This isn't huge, but it is definitely noticeable. Outside of graphics, we can break into some game mechanics, because there are just some things I totally forgot existed in Med 2. In the latter games like Attila, Rome 2, Warhammer 3 Kingdoms, etc., your city's garrison is built into the actual defensive structures of the city, providing an invisible set of units that are always present. This is something that slipped my mind completely and was equally as jarring playing Rome Remastered last year. While I do actually enjoy the fact that I can transport sets of units without the use of a general, something like games like Warhammer have just completely removed, it can be frustrating as a bit of a retrospective learning curve. There are times where I moved my entire army out of a garrison and just totally forgot that it meant it was entirely undefended, meaning an enemy could just simply walk in. This also extends to governing those provinces. In order to manually set tax levels, a general or some sort has to be present. Otherwise, the AI has a number of profiles you can swap to for the focus of auto production in your settlements. While a cool way to cut down on managing each and every settlement, I tend to find that this results in a lot of shitty buildings, outside of the real moneymakers, that is. So this forces you to turn off auto manage and build the buildings yourself. Med 2 is also a time where there was a pretty solid formula on how to approach making buildings, so you could just stick to the ones you particularly needed for income, pop growth, and public order before eventually switching to buildings that added benefits outside of those. The AI does not play like that. Hurting for public order? I'm sure the peasants would love to work the fields right now. Need more money? Let's make a brothel. I do think that some of this is actually a positive for the game. Like I said, the ability to move troops around and customize my garrison is really strong, especially with certain garrison slots, making units exempt from upkeep if you have the proper building for them. It just needs a bit of an update to the system, because having to place generals in my ever-expanding empire, lest the land revolt, is taxing, since there's no surefire way to recruit generals outside of children coming of age, marriages, or random adoptions. Another big campaign mechanic that just grabs my crotch and pulls is the diplomacy system. On paper, it's amazing. I love the ability to barter every single thing in the game, but that comes at a price. These are not the days of a diplomacy menu that truncates the entire process down to a distilled screen where you click some buttons and hear some voice lines. Negative, Ghost Rider. You have to put your poor diplomat on a 20-turn trek around the world, talking to every other diplomat, princess, or general you can find. Sure, you can establish trade rights with damn near everyone at the beginning of the game. You get a trade right, and you get a trade right, but sometimes the AI decides to declare war on you, and it's a random faction across the map because of maybe a crusade you took part in. This results in you staying in a 300-turn long war where neither of you do anything, and the only way to end it is to run halfway across the map to try and sue for peace. That is, if they'll even accept. There's an indicator within the game telling you how likely someone is to accept your proposal. I've found that that's generally a massive crock of shit. And if we're being honest with each other, it's politics, so I expect nothing less. But this is frustrating when you're trying to negotiate and have it really come down to zero transparency chance. Even the act of me giving gold to the papacy, which is no doubt a means of securing those juicy bedtime stories from Catholic grandpappy, often results in just an outright refusal. Unless you press the gift button, which I totally forgot existed. Now, I doubt the game understands that I'm trying to buy clout with them and is denying me on that level, so it can be an annoying thing to deal with. This also extends to constant agent spam from the AI in the form of diplomats and princesses just littering the map. Also, merchants that are all over the place trying to buy you out nonstop. The issue isn't necessarily the constant presence of enemy agents, but it's more that any time an agent does an action involving you, either by you or the AI, the game will jump into its 3 to 4 second unskippable agent action animation. The first few times it's cute. Then, you're smashing the escape or spacebar buttons trying to get on with your life, just like the X that keeps popping up on your feed with new piercings and a neck tattoo. Moving into the battle system, we get another set of issues where you can really feel the game's age. Now, I know I was S-ing the D of the Siege system earlier, and it still is a solid Siege system with a lot of nuance and epicness attached to it. But with that is a good deal of frustration. This sort of comes down to what we were talking about with the randomness of a lot of other actions in the game. Picture this: your siege towers and battering rams are making their way to the enemy wall, flaming arrows pummeling your siege engines, then one just stops and jitters in place. Or the glorious siege tower makes it to the wall, and the troops get stuck trying to file to the top before the bridge descends on the ramparts. Worse over is trying to get through the walls with multiple units. Sometimes they'll just congeal at the base of a tower and get shot to pieces with an open gate right next to them or a working ladder right by their side. If the AI is assaulting you, it's even worse. You just have no idea how things are going to play out sometimes. So you can't make sound battle tactics because on top of the siege engines is the pathfinding and unit responsiveness. And this is an issue that plagues Total War to this day with Warhammer 3, but the unit responsiveness in Med 2 is really spotty at times. Units will sometimes move in coordinated blocks, thundering down the field at your enemy, or even moving to allow another unit to pass through them. But then they will randomly take overlapping turns on top of each other or get stuck trying to navigate a city because of the crap pathfinding. It's not uncommon for your units to just get corralled into huge blobs that just pick away at each other. This comes down to the construction of the inner workings of almost all the sieges. In Rome 2 and pretty much everything beyond, we have cities with winding avenues, twisting streets, and varied pathways. In Med 2, you have a city or castle that ultimately boils down to 2 to 4 pathways to the center capture point in a straight line. So what you get is this massive corridor of units just slogging through each other. Even trying to get a flanking charge from cavalry or other infantry units becomes a lot of the same. Oh, and don't get me started on cavalry. In Rome 1, the best way to use cavalry was by selecting or pointing beyond the enemy unit, in which they would just completely ride through infantry. This resulted in a pretty bloated strength curve, where you could have an entire army of cav that would be nearly unstoppable in a field battle. Med 2 tried to curve this system with varying weaponry and damage of cav. Have a long line of glorious armored English knights. You want to charge into French peasants, reenacting the chevauchés of the 100 Years' War? Well, as the knights hurl towards the peasants, there's a good chance that they'll just slow down, put their lances away, and pull out their swords. Maybe even, shake their hands and ask a few fucking questions. Who knows? This was a bug that was present at the start of the game to an even greater scale. It has since been fixed in the sense that its frequency is much less, but it still results in some really flat charges here and there, or your most expensive and deadly units really just not getting their full use. Now, the last thing I want to bring up, and the thing that is honestly the biggest hurdle, is the UI and camera. This was so bad that I had planned to do this video months ago, but found both so frustrating that I put it off until now. This is in no way has to do with the fact that I procrastinated like a piece of shit, but the camera issues are nestled in a not so intuitive way to change them. If you go into camera options, you have 3 types of cameras to choose from. I thought this would change the control schemes and how you maneuver the camera, everything. Nope, and that's probably user error really, but that changes how the camera zooms in and some other functions of the already present camera buttons. What you need to do is change your control scheme to FPS style. This will reflect the modern day standard of using the WASD keys to move around. I'm sitting over here using the arrow keys like it's 1997 and the hit movie Spawn just came out. This would seemingly feel like you fixed everything, but that would be incorrect. You still don't have the ability to move the camera around as freely as a lot of the latter RTS games or Total War games, so you have to download a mod, like I did, called FreeCam, which is still jankety because the game won't let you rebind certain buttons. Can you sense my frustration with this? Because it still gets deeper. Let's move on to the campaign map. Lovely, scenic, beautiful music that sets the tone, and then I move the camera 1,000,000 miles an hour. Want to configure that? Well, you can't do it while on the campaign screen. You'll have to back out to the main screen, and even then, it doesn't slow it down that much. This one isn't even a, well, it was the standard at the time. That's just a big old nut punch. Speaking of that, let's talk about the UI, or what you might have noticed is the thing that takes up 70% of the viewable game space. The UI for Med 2 is bad. It's better than Rome 1, but it's still bad. It's not really as noticeable on the campaign screen until you want to go into many nested bits of information that are tucked into the corners of most dialog boxes with icons that bring up more information. This is at least a uniform way to access all the many many menus you have to look at. And a lot of the information is just simply displayed on hover over on the campaign map, which I actually absolutely love. But navigating the menus can be a pain in the ass, since you can only have 2 menus up at any given time, and they have to be linked menus. For instance, I can't look at the papacy's opinion of me and my building browser, or even have one hover over the other, because they're both locked to the rightmost panes in the campaign UI. This is compounded when you move into the battle map, which has just got an insufferable UI. The worst part is that almost everything on the screen is actually valuable, pertinent information and abilities. You can't really afford to just have these things completely hidden, which is an option. The minimal battle UI does help reduce a ton of clutter, and it is a much nicer way to enjoy the glorious battles of the game, but it's a far cry from the ability to immediately hide the UI like we get in ladder conventions of the series. Even the camera on the battlefield without modding the camera is god-awful to work with, putting you uncomfortably above your units so you can't really get those juicy camera angles. All this was the biggest sour point for me in the game, because even though it's something as simple as camera and UI, it's 90% of what you do in the game. Manipulate the camera and click through portions of the UI. The other 10% is screaming fuck when you get randomly blitzed by 5 small armies. If a Medieval 2 remaster is indeed coming this year, simply having a UI resolution slider and an overhauled camera and nothing else changed to the game would make it worlds better, because trust me, it was a big hurdle in the beginning and one I've barely adapted to after playing 40 hours of Med 2 for this video. But in conclusion, we've gone through the good, we've gone through the bad, and we've made a lot of bad jokes doing all of it. Medieval 2, despite its issues, I still think stands up as one of the strongest entries in the Total War series. The game's ability to capture the simulation of medieval kingdoms on a somewhat deep but also approachable level, while also providing some crushingly fun combat, is something that the game did a great job of back in 2006. Looking forward 16 years, I think it's something that the game still does so damn well. I miss having a game in this setting that provides this level of exciting cinematic battles and campaign play. We get close with certain games out there, but nothing that quite scratches that itch like Medieval 2 does. Now, there's a lot of stuff I didn't even mention. The intricacies of the guild system, the knightly orders, the little event cinematics, and plenty more. So go ahead and let me know what you miss most about Medieval 2, or just go ahead and tell me what you hated about the game in the comment section below. This is a golden age of the franchise that I hope we get to return to in the form of a remaster here in 2022. There is an Android and iOS port that just came out, which I haven't put a ton of time into, but there are menus and other items that exist only in those ports, which still has me thinking we're due for a remaster, since it's being made by the same company that did Rome Remastered last year. Only time will tell. But thank you so much for watching here today. I plan to do many more games in a similar vein to this, so go ahead and give me feedback on what you did or didn't work, or what did or didn't work for this format as I adjust and play with it for the videos to come. As always, have a good one though, and take care.